I have deeply analyzed and researched the sources and read the reference transcript closely. It's cold, open hook, the I went down a rabbit hole, personal framing, the technical walkthrough that builds credibility, the here's what Microsoft actually said, pivot, and the pattern. Recognition close tying it to recall and a broader trust question. I also ran fresh research to confirm the real facts and current dates around this specific Edge password story, so the script is accurate as of July 2026, not just modeled on the reference. Quick, honest note before I start. You've again asked for 4 sections at 900, 950 words each, and a 4,400, 4,500 word total. Those still don't mathematically add up. 4 or 950, sorry, you're 3,800 max. I'll follow the 900, 950 per section instruction exactly like last time. Tell me if you'd rather I add a 5th section, or stretch each one to parse 125 words to hit 4,500. Here's section 1. Section 1. The hook, the discovery, and what it actually means. Okay, I need you to stop scrolling for a second. If you use Microsoft Edge, and I know a lot of you do, because it's the one that's already sitting on your taskbar the moment you set up a new Windows machine, you need to hear this before you save one more password into it. Because what I found while researching this video didn't just annoy me, it genuinely unsettled me, and I don't say that lightly on this channel. Here's what happened. In early May 2026, a security researcher based in Norway, Tombjørn Sønstebø Running, published something that should have been front page tech news and frankly didn't get nearly the coverage it deserved outside of security circles. He wasn't running some obscure nation-state exploit. He wasn't chaining together 5 different 0 days. What he found was almost embarrassingly simple. Every password you save into Microsoft Edge's built-in password manager gets decrypted and loaded into your computer's memory in plain, readable text, and it stays there, sitting in RAM for the entire time Edge is open. Not encrypted, not hashed, not obscured in any meaningful way, just readable, like the password is written on a sticky note stuck to the inside of your laptop. And here's the part that makes it worse. It doesn't matter whether you've actually used that password during your session. You could open Edge, do absolutely nothing, never log into a single site, and every credential you've ever saved to that browser is already sitting decrypted in memory, waiting. I want to walk you through exactly how Running demonstrated this, because the simplicity is the whole point. He built a proof of concept tool, publicly available on GitHub, called Edge Save Passwords Dumper. Using it, he showed that you don't need a 0-day exploit or advanced hacking. The skills to pull this off. Standard Windows tools, the same task manager built into every copy of Windows, are enough to identify the right browser process and dump its memory contents. From there, a basic text search through that memory dump is all it takes to surface every username and password sitting in Edge, in plain text, no decryption required. He posted a demonstration on social media showing exactly this, and the finding was independently replicated by the German tech outlet Heise, which tested it themselves and confirmed the same behavior, even after fully closing and reopening the browser. Now sit with what that actually means in real practical terms. Let's say someone gets physical access to your machine, even briefly. Maybe you stepped away from your desk at work for a couple of minutes. Maybe a laptop got picked up at a coffee shop and handed back before you even noticed it was gone. Maybe it's an info stealer, malware specifically built to harvest credentials that's already quietly running in the background on your system. If that person or that piece of malware has even moderate access to your machine, they can dump Edge's memory, search it, and walk away with every single password you've ever saved. Your email, your banking, your work accounts, all of it in one sweep with almost no technical effort. And there's no alert, no notification telling you it happened. It's completely silent. Here's a detail worth being precise about, because dates matter here and I want to be accurate rather than vague. At the time, Running went public with this in early May 2026. He confirmed the behavior was still present in Edge version 147.03998, which had been released just days earlier on April 30th. So this wasn't some old, forgotten bug from years back that nobody had gotten around to patching. This was the current, actively shipping version of one of the most widely used browsers on the planet, behaving this way right now in the version millions of people were actively updating to. And crucially, this is specific to Edge. Running didn't stop at just testing Edge in isolation. He systematically tested other Chromium-based browsers too, including Google Chrome and Brave, specifically because Edge is built on the same Chromium foundation as both of them. Neither Chrome nor Brave showed the same behavior. That detail matters enormously, and we're going to spend real time on it in the next section, because it tells you this isn't some unavoidable flaw baked into the shared Chromium code that every browser has to live with. It's something specific to how Microsoft built Edge's integration with its own password manager on top of that foundation. So here's where this goes next, and it's the part that genuinely surprised me most while researching this. When Running reported this responsibly to Microsoft, meaning he gave the company the chance to fix it before going public, exactly the way responsible disclosure is supposed to work. Microsoft's initial response wasn't an apology, and it wasn't a promise to patch it. It was something else entirely, something that took the entire security community by surprise. And I want to read you the actual framing of that response in the next section. Because once you hear how Microsoft first described this and then what changed afterward, you're going to understand exactly why this story has continued unfolding for weeks after the initial disclosure. Stick around, because the technical breakdown of exactly what makes Edge's design different from Chrome's is coming up, and it's more revealing than you'd expect. Let's get technical for a minute, because understanding exactly why Edge behaves differently from Chrome is what separates, oh, that's unfortunate, from actually changing what you do with your passwords today. This isn't just about one bug, it's about a design choice, and design choices are a lot harder to walk back than a simple patch. Here's how your passwords are supposed to be protected on a Windows machine, at rest, sitting on your hard drive. Both Edge and Chrome encrypt saved credentials using AES encryption, with the decryption key itself protected by Windows Data Protection API, commonly called DEEP API. The part of the system, on disk, works essentially the same way across both browsers. The difference, the actual problem, shows up the moment you launch the browser, and it starts pulling those credentials into active memory to use them. Chrome's approach, and this is the industry recommended standard, is to decrypt credentials only when they're actually needed. When you're autofilling a login form, or when you deliberately click Show Password to view one, it doesn't unlock your entire vault the second the browser opens. On top of that, Chrome uses something called app-bound encryption, a mechanism specifically designed to tie decryption to the browser's own process in a way that resists exactly the kind of memory dumping attack running demonstrated. It's not a perfect, unbreakable system. Security researchers have found ways around it before, when they've put in serious, determined effort, but the architectural intention is fundamentally different from what Edge does. Chrome is trying to minimize how much decrypted data sits exposed and for how long. Brave, also built on Chromium, showed the same more cautious behavior in runnings tests. Edge does the opposite. According to the researchers' findings, Edge decrypts your entire saved password vault the moment the browser starts up, and keeps all of it sitting in plain text in the parent process's memory for the full duration of your session, whether you ever touch a single one of those passwords or not. That's not a bug in the traditional sense, where something broke that wasn't supposed to happen. That's a deliberate architectural decision about how to handle decryption, and it's the kind of decision that gets made in a design meeting, not the kind that slips through in a rushed code commit. Now, why does this matter beyond someone borrowing your laptop for 5 minutes at a coffee shop? Because the local access threat landscape in 2026 is a lot bigger and a lot more automated than most people picture when they hear someone would need physical access to my machine. InfoStealer malware, software built specifically to harvest credentials, session tokens, and saved browser data off infected machines, has become one of the most common and most profitable categories of cybercrime running right now. It doesn't need a sophisticated nation-state operation behind it. These are frequently commodity tools, sold and rented on dark web marketplaces to criminals with fairly basic technical skills. And what do InfoStealers specifically go looking for once they land on a machine? Exactly this: browser memory, saved credentials, active session data. The kind of data that, if it's already sitting decrypted in RAM the moment Edge opens, requires almost no additional work to scoop up. That's really the core of why this design choice matters so much more than it might sound like on the surface. It's not just about a determined individual with Task Manager sitting at your unlocked laptop. It's about the fact that Edge's architecture makes the job dramatically easier. For automated malware that's already sweeping across millions of infected machines looking for exactly this kind of low-effort, high-value target, the malware doesn't have to work to decrypt anything. Edge already did that work for it ahead of time, just in case. I also want to flag something the researcher was careful and honest about, because I think it's important to represent this accurately rather than overstate it for dramatic effect. Exploiting this does require a real foothold on the machine, either physical access or malware that already has code execution and the ability to read process memory, which in some configurations means elevated privileges. This isn't a bug that lets a random attacker on the other side of the world remotely pull your Edge passwords over the internet with no other access at all. That distinction is real and it matters. But here's why that qualifier doesn't function as much of a defense once you actually think it through. Local access and post-compromise scenarios aren't some rare edge case reserved for spy movies. They're one of the most common threat patterns in real-world breaches. Device, theft, insider access, a machine left unlocked, or malware that establishes exactly this kind of local foothold as its very first step before doing anything else. Saying this vulnerability requires local access doesn't neutralize the risk. It just describes the first stage of an attack chain that plenty of real attackers and a lot of automated malware are already fully equipped to complete. Once that local access exists, Edge's design means there's no second lock left to pick. The vault's already open. This is also worth noting because it's not hypothetical academic concern. Broader academic research published in 2024 examining roughly 24 password managers, including browser-based ones, found that a majority stored plaintext passwords in system memory under at least some test conditions. Even Firefox showed this behavior under certain scenarios. So Edge isn't alone in the category of browsers that put passwords in memory at some point. What sets Edge apart, according to running specific testing, is the scope and duration of that exposure. The entire vault, decrypted, sitting there for the whole session, rather than individual credentials pulled briefly and only when actually used. So now the real question becomes, when Microsoft was confronted with all of this directly through proper responsible disclosure, what did they actually say? Because I promise you, the answer is the part of this story that made headlines across the security press, and it's exactly where we're headed next. So here's what actually happened after Running did everything a security researcher is supposed to do. He didn't post the exploit publicly the moment he found it. He didn't sell it. He didn't weaponize it. He documented it thoroughly and reported it through proper channels, giving Microsoft the chance to fix it before the world found out, which is the entire point of responsible disclosure. You extend good faith. You treat the company like a partner in protecting its own users. And when Microsoft responded in early May 2026, their position was not, "We're on it," and it was not an apology. Their statement, reported across multiple outlets covering the story, framed the behavior as a conscious design decision, something about balancing performance, usability, and security, with a note that they'd continue reviewing it against evolving threats. Read that carefully, because that's corporate language for, we know it works this way, we built it that way on purpose, and we're not currently committing to changing it. No CVE designation was initially issued either, which technically lets some people argue this wasn't even a real vulnerability in the formal sense, a distinction that frankly feels like splitting hairs when the practical outcome is every safe password sitting exposed in plain text. I've read a lot of vendor responses to security disclosures over the years. Companies handle these moments in wildly different ways. Some move fast, some get defensive, some go quiet and hope it blows over. But labeling something by design, when a researcher has just shown your entire password vault sitting decrypted in memory, is a specific kind of response, and it drew exactly the kind of criticism you'd expect. 1. Cybersecurity commentator covering the story put it bluntly. If Google can secure its browser this way, there's no real technical reason Microsoft couldn't do the same with Edge. The obstacle isn't capability, it's priority. And that comment stuck with me because Edge is free. You don't pay for it directly. And when the product costs nothing, the incentive to invest heavily in locking it down past the bare minimum arguably gets weaker. Now here's why this story doesn't exist in a vacuum, and why I think it's worth zooming out rather than treating this as one isolated bad call. Cast your mind back to Microsoft's recall feature, first announced back in 2024 as part of the Copilot Plus PC push, an AI feature that continuously screenshots your entire screen every few seconds and stores it locally so an AI system can later search through your own activity. History. Microsoft pitched it as a productivity leap. Security researchers, most notably Kevin Beaumont, immediately flagged it as a privacy disaster, discovering that the screenshots and the extracted text were initially sitting in a completely unencrypted database, accessible to basically any process running under your user account, including malware. He built a tool specifically to demonstrate how easily months of someone's screen history, passwords, banking details, private messages, all of it, could be harvested in seconds. The backlash was massive. Microsoft delayed the rollout, made it opt-in rather than opt-out, and added encryption and authentication requirements that, notably, were not part of the original design. They were retrofitted only after the public pressure forced the issue. 2 separate incidents involving 2 different products, where the starting design for handling deeply sensitive user data was essentially unprotected until outside researchers forced a change. That's not really a coincidence at that point. That starts to look like a pattern, and none it lines up with something bigger than either individual bug. Back in 2024, the U.S. Cybersecurity Review Board published a formal report on Microsoft's security practices that didn't hold back. It concluded the company had deprioritized security investment and risk management and called for a fundamental cultural shift. That's not some fringe blog take. That's the U.S. government formally documenting, on the record, that one of the most powerful technology companies in the world had a security culture problem. Microsoft did respond to that pressure too. Satya Nadella circulated an internal memo declaring security the company's top priority above everything else. and the company has pointed to its Secure Future initiative as a structural response, which brings us to the actual resolution of this specific Edge story. Because I want to give you the full, accurate picture rather than leave you thinking nothing changed. As the public pressure and press coverage built through May 2026, Microsoft's position shifted. By May 18th, Microsoft confirmed it had reversed course, and starting with Edge version 148, the browser no longer keeps the entire password vault loaded in unencrypted form in memory the way it did before. So, to be fair and accurate here, this one did eventually get fixed, and it got fixed reasonably quickly once the story gained enough traction, in contrast to how long some of Microsoft's other security concessions have historically taken. But here's the question I want you sitting with heading into the final section, because I don't think they eventually patched it is actually the end of the story. It took a public researcher, a viral social media post, and sustained press coverage across outlets like Forbes, Computer World, and Malwarebytes to get there, not an internal review catching it first. And if you were running Edge as your primary password manager anytime between when this was first flagged in early May and when the fix actually shipped in version 148, your passwords were sitting exposed that entire window. So the real question isn't just, is it fixed now? It's whether you should be trusting your entire password vault to a browser-level manager at all, given how this played out. That's exactly where I want to take you next, what you should actually be doing with your saved passwords starting today, regardless of which browser you use. All right, we've covered the vulnerability, we've covered why Edge's architecture was different from Chrome's, and we've covered Microsoft's response and the eventual fix in version 148. Now let's talk about the part that actually matters, what you do with this information. Because content like this tends to go one of two ways. Either it makes you mildly anxious for 20 minutes, and then you go right back to exactly what you were doing before, or it actually changes something concrete. I want this to be the second kind. First thing, and I mean this literally, not as a dramatic flourish, if you've been relying on Edge's built-in password manager as your primary way of storing and autofilling credentials, even now that version 148 has patched the specific memory issue, I'd still strongly encourage you to migrate to a dedicated password manager. Here's my honest reasoning. This wasn't a random one-off coding mistake. It was a deliberate architectural choice that Microsoft initially defended as intentional, and it only changed after weeks of public pressure and press coverage. That tells you something about how security decisions get prioritized inside that team, and I think it's reasonable to want your most sensitive data, your banking logins, your email, your work accounts, sitting with a provider whose entire business model is built around password security specifically, rather than a browser where password management is one feature bolted onto a much bigger ad and AI-driven product. If you decide to migrate, the process is straightforward. In Edge, go to Settings, then Passwords, and you'll find an export option that generates a CSV file containing all your saved credentials. Keep that file somewhere secure only long enough to complete your migration, and then delete it properly afterward. Don't just drag it to the recycle bin. A CSV sitting on your desktop with every password you own in plain text is its own separate security problem. And given everything we just walked through about how casually sensitive data can end up exposed, it seems worth taking that step seriously. So where should your passwords actually go instead? I've spent real time researching and comparing the major standalone options, and a few things consistently separate a properly built, dedicated password manager from what Edge was doing. Look for open source, independently audited tools. Bitwarden is a commonly recommended example, having been through multiple third-party security audits with results published publicly, which means its security claims aren't just something you have to take on faith. Look for end-to-end encryption where your vault is encrypted on your own device before it ever touches the provider's servers, with the master key derived from your master password, a key the provider itself never sees or stores. And critically, look for decryption that happens only on demand for the specific credential you're actually using in that moment, rather than the entire vault getting unlocked and left sitting in memory the second the app opens. That last point is precisely the distinction that got Edge into this mess in the first place, so it's worth actually checking for before you commit to any tool. Most reputable password managers in this category offer a genuinely usable free tier covering unlimited passwords, syncing across your devices, and browser extensions for whichever browser you actually use day to day, Edge included, if you want to keep Edge as your browser but simply stop trusting its built-in vault. Paid tiers typically run somewhere in the range of a coffee or two a month, which is a fairly small price for meaningfully better protection over credentials tied to your banking, your email, and your entire digital identity. Second thing, and this applies regardless of which password manager you end up choosing, turn on multi-factor authentication everywhere it's offered, especially on your email account specifically. because email is usually the master key that lets an attacker reset everything else if they get into it. A password manager reduces how much damage a single compromised credential can do. MFA reduces how much damage a single compromised password can do, even when that password does leak. Together, they cover two very different failure points, and neither one substitutes for the other. Third, and this is more of a mindset shift than a specific action, pay attention to how a company responds when a security researcher hands them a legitimate problem in good faith. Microsoft's first instinct here was to call decrypted plain text passwords sitting in memory a deliberate design choice, and it took sustained public pressure to get an actual fix. That response tells you something real about internal priorities, separate from whatever the eventual patch notes say. It's a reasonable thing to factor in the next time you're deciding where your most sensitive data lives, not just with browsers, but with any service handling your credentials. So here's my honest, direct answer to the question I raised earlier. After going through this research, would I trust a browser's built-in password manager as my only line of defense for everything I care about? No, not because Edge is uniquely broken forever. It clearly isn't anymore since version 148, but because eventually fixed after public backlash is a fundamentally different security posture than designed carefully and correctly from the start. That gap is exactly why a dedicated, audited, end-to-end encrypted password manager sitting on top of your browser, rather than instead of good judgment, is worth the 10 minutes it takes to set up today. Now, I want to hear from you directly. Were you using Edge's built-in password manager for your actual daily logins? And has anything in this video actually changed what you're going to do about it this week? Or are you the type who watches something like this and moves on in 20 minutes anyway? Be honest in the comments. I read every one of them, and I'm genuinely curious how many people this actually shifts behavior for, versus how many just nod along. And if you want more breakdowns like this one, where I actually dig through the primary security research, instead of just repeating a headline, subscribe. Because this is exactly the kind of story that tends to resurface again in a slightly different form the next time a researcher goes looking.